When the movie begins, a deaf-mute horror author, Maddie Young, is introduced, who suffered from bacterial meningitis at the age of 13, which left her speechless and deaf. Both permanent hearing loss and transient vocal cord paresis, which turned permanent after unsuccessful surgery, were brought on by the condition. After publishing the book, Midnight Mass, and winning widespread praise from critics across the world, Maddie moved out of New York City to live alone in the woods with her white cat, hoping to advance her literary career. One evening, her friend Sarah stops by to return a copy of her book. During her visit, they discuss Sarah's wish to become more proficient in sign language and her loneliness. While they are conversing about Maddie's career, a fire alarm grabs their attention inside the house as a result of an overcooked meal. Maddie keeps her fire alarm too loud, giving her an option to notice sound vibrations in case anything happens. Since Maddie's dinner is destroyed in the process, Sarah invites her at her place, but Maddie declines. After saying a gentle goodbye and wishing Maddie a good luck for future, Sarah departs. Later that evening, Sarah is attacked and pursued to Maddie's house by a masked assassin, brandishing a crossbow. Sarah, covered in blood, knocks on the door and cries out for assistance. Maddie doesn't hear her since she is deaf, so the murderer stabs Sarah 13 times in the stomach, brutally killing her. After rapidly determining that Maddie is deaf, the murderer chooses to attempt to turn her into another victim. When Maddie is using her laptop, the killer covertly breaks in and stands behind her. Maddie suddenly receives a video call from her sister, forcing the killer to hide. During the call, her sister informs her about some movement behind her, but Maddie considers it just the cat. After the call, Maddie searches through the house for her cat, but is unable to find her. In the meantime, the killer uses her cell phone to snap, and sends the pictures through email, giving the impression that someone is stalking her. When Maddie notices an open door, her suspicions are confirmed. She walks closer, and hastily shuts the door, after noticing the masked man outside. Maddie tries to call 911, but the killer cuts the power, leaving her stranded inside the house. After that, he uses his knife to puncture her car's tires, leaving no chance to escape. Maddie uses her lipstick and scrawls a message on the glass panel door, which says this. In response, the murderer removes his mask to reveal his face, frightening her with the possibility of an impending break-in, after realizing she can read lips. Maddie takes a knife and hammer, and locks herself in a room. After finding her hiding position, he uses Sarah's corpse, and taps on the window, revealing to Maddie that he actually killed her. She leaves that room, and sobs in despair. After that, Maddie uses her vehicle keys to set off her car alarm, in an attempt to divert the killer's attention, and get Sarah's phone out of her corpse's pocket. However, he catches her before she can get the phone, forcing her to hastily lock herself back inside. After a vain attempt to get the phone, she decides to leave the house, while keeping an eye on the killer. The killer comes back to the main door, forcing her to hide in the crawl space. When the killer walks away to the backside, she runs into the woods, but she is noticed by him, and locks herself back inside, nearly avoiding the crossbow bolts. She goes upstairs, and decides to flee through the second-story window. She throws a flashlight into the woods, and creates a distraction for the killer, but before she could climb down, he shoots her in the leg with the crossbow bolt. He then climbs through the vines, and follows her, but she is able to knock him off the roof, and take the weapon. The killer manages to climb up in the second attempt, but she locks herself back in. She then goes to the restroom, and covers her wound, while suffering from unbearable pain. John, Sarah's boyfriend, shows up at Maddie's house in search of his girlfriend. The killer disguises himself as a police officer, and forces John to give him his cell phone. John begins to suspect the killer, after he pretends that he is responding to a phone call from the residence, since John is aware of the fact that Maddie is unable to hear or speak. He intends to use a boulder to hit the murderer from behind, but Maddie distracts him by tapping on the window, giving the murderer an opportunity to stab him in the neck. John still uses his last remaining energy, and puts the killer in a chokehold to buy Maddie enough time to escape, but she thinks that she will either be caught or bleed to death. John fails to kill him, and eventually bleeds to death. Having no other option but to kill the attacker, is her only hope of surviving. Outside, the murderer is going to use his knife to kill Maddie's cat, when she finally uses the crossbow to stab him in the shoulder. Unfortunately, as she ducks inside the house, and reaches for another crossbow arrow, the killer slams the sliding door on Maddie's wrist, crushing her hand under his shoes. He allows Maddie to pull her broken hand inside and lock the door. Maddie uses her own blood to write a challenging message on the door as he makes a threat to enter. Maddie utilizes her laptop to compose a message to her family and a description of the men, as the murderer starts using a tire iron to smash through the door. Then, armed with a knife, she locks herself in the bathroom. After failing to break through the door, the killer chooses to smash through the bathroom skylight. Maddie is unable to notice him until he gives away his presence by breathing on Maddie's neck. She slashes at his knee, after barely avoiding his blow. The dumb woman still runs away, rather than using this opportunity to stab him again. He follows her into the kitchen, where she sprays pesticide all over his face, and uses her loud visual smoke alarm to confuse him. He beats her down, and nearly kills her by strangling her, but she stabs him in the neck with a corkscrew, and puts an end to the torture. After having a sigh of relief, she retrieves her phone from his pocket, and dials 911. She leaves her house, and sits on her porch. As the police vehicles approach Maddie, she strokes her cat, and smiles.